Hello, my name is Mr. John Banks, and I am one of the History and Moral Studies teachers up at Doonan Grammar School. I currently have responsibility for teaching two of the three National 5 History classes in our department. I put together this How to Pass video today to provide you with an overview of our National 5 course for history and also to give you some advice on how to best prepare your child for the upcoming exam. First of all, today we will be covering the course, what is in National 5 History for both S4 and S5-6. What will the exam look like? Second of all, we will be having a brief but detailed look and breakdown of each of the question types which your young people will be asked in the final exam. And then lastly, I will be providing you with some advice on how to best support your child going forward and also point to some useful resources which may help you do so. So let's first take a look at the National 5 History course. National 5 History is divided into three different areas: a Scottish context, a British context, and a European and world context. And this is reflected in the final exam, which has three sections of the same name. Over the course of the year, your child will learn one topic from each in order to give them the knowledge required to answer questions in the final exam. So the courses are different in S4 to a Senior National 5. So let's cover the S4 course first. S4s will look at the era of the Great War for Scotland. For Britain, they will look at the Atlantic slave trade. And finally, for the European and world context, they will study Hitler and Nazi Germany. Whereas at Senior National 5, so those in S5-6, they look at the Scottish Wars of Independence first for the Scottish context. Then they study Making a Modern Britain, which is a British context. And finally, they look at the Russian Revolution for their European and world unit. So, as I mentioned, the knowledge that they gain over the course of the year from these three contexts will allow them to answer the three separate sections of the final exam. So the National 5 History exam asks students 14 questions over these three sections. It is 80 marks in total, and students have 2 hours and 20 minutes to tackle the paper. There are two different groups of questions in the National 5 History exam. There are knowledge and understanding or KU questions and inquiry skills questions, ES questions. Knowledge and understanding questions, as the name alludes, test students' knowledge and understanding of the course content they have learned. The described question is a straightforward question worth 4 marks, and there are 2 of these in the exam. The slightly harder explain question, there are 3 of these in the exam, and these are worth 6 marks. And then finally, there are 2 short essay questions worth 9 marks in the exam. The inquiry skills questions test a student's ability to analyse and to utilise historical sources to answer questions. First of all, there is a straightforward comparison question worth 4 marks, and there's 2 of these in the exam. Then there is the more difficult evaluate the usefulness question, where students have to evaluate the usefulness of a historical source to us as historians. This is worth 5 marks, and there are 2 of these in the exam. And then finally, there is the how fully questions. Recently, the SQA split the how fully question into 2 different question types, though they're answered roughly the same way with small differences for the students. First of all, there is a how fully described question, which is the easier question to answer, and there are 2 of these in the final exam. There is also a how fully explained question. There is 1 of these in the exam, and this is a bit more demanding of students. So let's take a look at these types of exam style question in a bit more depth. So the described question is first up. The described question demands that students produce 4 pieces of relevant knowledge and write these down in full sentences. The described question is a more straightforward question, and therefore we'll be looking for students to write these quickly and with pace, so that the time that they save on the described question can be used for more difficult questions. Now, I understand that it can be quite difficult to list 4 pieces of relevant knowledge on any issue that they've looked at in the course. However, through practice and through creating of lists and mind maps in their jotters from their notes, they can build up the knowledge required to eventually do this from their own memory. And I believe that flashcards is a good way to do it from their own memory. So asking described questions on flashcards where students have to use that recall, use their brain to recall that information, that's good practice for the exam. And once we've got the knowledge and once we've got the ability to recall it, we could start to use exam style questions in order to build up our pace, the pace at which we write these points out. So if we know the points, we can remember the points quickly, and then we can write the points quickly, the described question will be an extremely easy question for the students. Now, the explain question is a more hard question, and this is where some of the extra time saved doing the described question quickly is going to go. So the described question asks for 4 points, the explain question asks for 6. The explain question is also written in full sentences, but it requires what the SQA call process. Now, that means that students actually have to describe the importance, effect, or impact of the point they're trying to make. They can do this very simply by saying terms like this meant that, or this was because. And this allows the marker to see that students are not only describing, but then they're giving this meant that, this was because, which shows an explanation afterwards. So they make their point, which is like a described point, and then they say this was because, or this meant that, and they then build in their explanation. So that's how they show they can explain effectively. So how to prepare? The best way to prepare for an explain question is to practice the questions, perhaps following model answers to start with and using notes, but I would say over time moving to doing them from memory. A good way to build up that initial knowledge is to do some further reading for understanding, to build up an understanding of why the different points that you would make in an explain question are important, so that the explanation comes more easily. Another good way would be to design concept maps where points are expanded upon and reasons are given as the map grows. And then this will allow the more effective completion of exam style questions. So thirdly, the short essay question, often referred to as a to what extent question. This requires students to produce 5 pieces of relevant knowledge similar to the way the described question does. However, students must follow an essay structure, which includes an introduction, having a supported conclusion, and having paragraph balance in order to gain additional 4 points. Now, paragraph balance means that students must talk about more than one factor in their essay. So, in this example, this is on the rise of the Nazis. There are more than one factor on the rise of the Nazis, or why the Nazis came to power. One being, yes, the discontent against the government, but also the appeal of the Nazis themselves. So if a student was to discuss 2 or more of these different factors, they would gain a balance mark. Now, students also tend to panic when they see 9 marks on the page. Students should keep calm and should attempt the question, because if they don't, in the final exam, they're going to be sacrificing up to 18 marks because there are 2 of these in the exam. Students can't afford to miss out the to what extent question. They need to keep calm and they need to attempt them. And they also need to write at pace, because students do have a habit of taking too long and treating this more like an English essay, but it needs to be well crafted. In reality, if they have 5 pieces of knowledge and they're able to write it in a basic essay structure, they will gain marks fairly quickly. So it can be written quickly. But that does take practice, and as there's overcoming that initial fear of the fact that the essay is going to be worth 9 marks. So how to prepare? As I mentioned previously, mind mapping is really good for building that base knowledge, using the notes taken in class to build like a succinct little map of the knowledge. Now, that knowledge can then be used to answer exam practice questions with the aid of model answers so that students are following the structure correctly. I think this is a good combination, using the mind maps and the model answers to create those practice answers, and then eventually doing it from memory. And also, I believe that writing them in pairs or crafting them together is quite an effective way. This can be done at home or in class, where students or a student and a parent work to build the essay together. So this gives students the idea and the understanding that it is not too difficult to build a to what extent question, a short essay question, and that they can actually do it by themselves fairly easy. But it's just good to have somebody else do it with them to start with to build their confidence. Quickfire question over the dinner table, similar to the flashcards. That's a really good way to test that recall knowledge. And then also using study guides. Study guides are really good for giving students like a little box of text or a paragraph of text which contains basically all the knowledge they'll need for a factor or two factors or an essay um, on a page. So I think study guides are a good way to, again, give students that little bit of further reading for understanding that they can then use to write their essay effectively. Now on to the comparison question, which is an inquiry skills question. So first of all, there is no knowledge required for the comparison question. It's purely source based. So students therefore need to have the ability to read analytically. They need to look through the sources, scan the sources for similarities or differences at quite a fast pace and not get bogged down in the reading of the source. So they need to practice reading these sources in order to build up that pace. So they need to have the ability to compare the sources in an overall sense. So do they agree or disagree overall? To then pick particular points from the source which the sources agree or disagree on, and then back this up with quotes to gain a simple and then developed comparison mark. Um, so that's all they need to do, be able to read the source, pick out similarities and differences and say whether they agree overall, and then pick out specific points they agree on or disagree on, and then back those up with quotes. Students often sometimes fail to write the quotes out in full. They sometimes stop short and therefore don't get the mark. So writing the full relevant quote is quite important. So students must do that. How best to prepare is just to do the comparison question, because ultimately this is just a skill that they need to work on. I think it's especially useful to pick um, comparison questions from topics that they've not studied before out of the past paper. So they could do one from the Mary Queen of Scots section, for instance, and that way they could just practice the skill because they don't need any knowledge. They don't need to know what's in the text. They don't need that for their learning. But what they do need is to be able to look through that source and be able to pick out similarities and differences. So they can do that with any comparison question, whether it's from the topic that they're studying or not. So moving on to our second inquiry skills question, the evaluate usefulness question. This is often perceived to be quite difficult by students. However, when they learn the correct format through practice, it does become much easier. So first of all, students have to analyse features of the source. For instance, who authored the source, the time it was made, what type of source it is, why it was written or made. Students need to consider these things. I believe that the author is the easiest one to comment on, and that is the way that I train students to answer the question, to comment on the usefulness of the author to us as historians. It's the one that seems to stick in their brain the best and is the least easy to trip up over. So Afterwards, students would then have to analyse the source's contents to pick out 2 relevant quotes from the source and then follow it up with analysis. The level of analysis that the SQA are looking for at this stage is simply, this is useful as it is accurate to my knowledge. That's all. This is useful as it is accurate to my knowledge. That's the level of analysis. So if a student can quote a relevant point and then say that in basic analysis afterwards, they get a mark. If they do that twice, it's 2 marks. Then they need to analyse the limitations of the source, so provide 2 points that the source fails to mention. And then they simply have to say this makes the source less useful because it fails to mention this. That is all. It's very simple analysis, but students sometimes get a little bit confused by that. But again, how to prepare for it is practice using exam style questions, following model answers, getting used to that analysis you must use, so familiarising yourself with that by doing peer marking and by doing exam style questions. I think that's the best way to prepare for this question. So on to our last question. So the how fully questions. Um, the how fully questions are answered extremely similarly, a very small differentiation between the explain type and the describe type. So first off, for the how fully described question, students must interpret information in their own words. The only difference being for how fully explain, they need to then place that in a wider context of the question, similar to the difference between a describe question and an explain question. Students just need to be able to say the relevance of the point to the question rather than just giving the point. They also need to be able to identify 3 points of knowledge from their own memory that they can then use that the source fails to mention. They'll then get 3 points for recalled knowledge, 3 marks for recalled knowledge. And students also have to have the ability to make an overall judgment on the source's fullness. A National 5 source will always be quite fully, so students get in the habit of doing that and familiarising themselves with the process required, the paraphrasing and judgment making required to gain full 6 marks. Now, they gain that through practice, again through the use of exam style questions and building up their knowledge through the use of mind maps and flashcards. So the combination of the practice using the source and the knowledge gained from the mind maps and the flashcards, we should be on a winner 6 out of 6 for a how fully question. And again, putting into that wider context for the how fully explain question. Now turn our attention to the different types of support available to students and how you can best support your young person at home to achieve the personal best in National 5 history. So first off, I'll be running study support after school on Mondays for an hour when we come back from the October break. I'll run this right through until exam leave starts next year. If your young person completes a past paper question at home, please, please encourage them to hand these in to the classroom teacher or to me at study support, as these will be marked. We're keen for students to be doing this, and we're keen to give them feedback too. All resources used for teaching, any model answers used in class or answer scaffolds will be up in Google Classroom for students who have missed learning through absence or wish to brush up on their knowledge and skills. Keep your eyes out for any school initiatives which may be running. The Assertive Mentoring Programme run last year and it was quite effective. So if you see that, please encourage your child to get involved. The other resources which are available, Mr. Mahistory is an experienced history teacher in Scotland and he answers the different types of exam style question online on YouTube, giving a step-by-step guide on how to do so, which could be useful for your own understanding or for the understanding of your child. So he also has a bank of past paper questions which are quite good as well. So it's a good place to start. BBC Bite Size and YouTube also provide a good insight into the National 5 History course. BBC Bite Size is a dedicated page to National 5 History, and YouTube has lots of relevant videos to the courses which we do. So they're a good place to start for building notes. The SQ website and Ultra Past Paper Finder are also sites that can be used to locate past paper questions to complete and then hand into your teacher to be marked. So use those websites, and there's also marking schemes on there which can be used to further fill out your notes if you're unsure of questions as well, or unsure if you have enough knowledge. Textbooks and study guides, while they can be expensive, if you believe your child would benefit from the use of one and would use it effectively, please do consider buying one. It may be worth dropping me a wee email to see if the one you're considering is the best one to buy, or one that we don't actually have available in school. So how can you help at home? So ensuring that and checking that revision that's being completed at home is actually meaningful and isn't just grazing or looking over notes. That's a really, really useful thing you can do to help us in history and across the school actually, because a lot of times students are guilty of just skimming over the notes rather than actually doing some in-depth revision. One of the ways you can help with that actually, and they can make that easy, is by making revision a family affair. Doing flashcard quizzes in the house, or putting questions on post-it notes and putting them on the fridge or the cupboard, so that if your child wants a yogurt or a biscuit, they have to answer a question on National 5 History first. It worked for me when I was at school, and it stuck in my brain as a good one and a fun one to use with a family at home. So I would also like to ask politely that you encourage your child to attend any study support sessions or any study school sessions which may run in the Easter holidays. Um, Attending these really does tend to improve or ensure that grades don't slide um, over the course of the year. So please encourage your child to attend um, these sessions after school or in the holidays. So also attending parents' evening would give you the best understanding of how your child's getting on in history, and it would also give us as teachers the best understanding of how your child is actually revising at home. So attending parents' evening is beneficial for us both. So attending parents' evening, if you could please attend, that would be really, really helpful. And also, if you keep your eyes open for any DGS sessions for parents, for instance, the ones on effective revision skills and techniques was really good last year. We did a staff one, which was the same session, and it was really good. I learned a lot, and I think it would be beneficial to any parent looking to help their child in National 5 history. And finally, if you are unsure of the history, if you didn't do a qualification history at school, it might be worth having a wee check out at BBC Bite Size or looking some stuff on YouTube, um, perhaps on Mr. Marr, to gain a better understanding of how to how to better support your child. Um, that might be something you'd like to do, and I think BBC Bite Size YouTube and Mr. Marr History are a great place to start for parents as well as students. That brings us to the end of this How to Pass National 5 guide. If you have any questions about the content of today's video or have any National 5 related questions which you require answering, please do not hesitate to contact me on my email address at john.banks@argyle.ac.uk. darshbutte.gov.uk. Thanks so much for listening. Goodbye.